Because our Children's Corner is open today, I was thinking about Sunday school, and as we called it at the time. Did you know that Sunday school originally was actually school? It was school for underprivileged children who were not educated, so the systems provided no education for children, public education. So they went to Sunday school and learned how to read and things like that. Anyway, I confess I remember little about my Sunday school days, but I do remember two teachers I really loved. I think in about 3rd grade, they were a couple, and I basked in their kindness. I remember when it came time to dismiss us, one of them would always say, "Go now and practice God." In class, we talked about practicing God a lot, in the small ways that we could relate to. We had a running list, what we might now call behavioral norms. To us, it was the practicing God list. Things like recognizing that others were trying to listen and not talking too loud, or that someone else might have something to say too and making room for them. I remember putting the caps on our Elmer's glue so the container worked for the next person was one of those reflections. Protecting children littler than us, not saying certain words ever, not hurting our pets, and we actually practiced apologizing and forgiving. Before there was WWJD, Mr. and Mrs. Pettis, I can't remember their first names, taught us the idea of practicing God. And what was so great about the Pettises is that they framed this as belonging to our classroom, to us. It was not children, here are the rules, but how do we want to practice God in this classroom? What I also loved was the we, not just the me. And I liked the word practice. I was a budding viola player, probably pretty horrible at the time in 3rd grade, but I knew that if I practiced, I could tell I was getting better. So I thought practicing was something I believed in. And I thought of it more of as a verb than a noun. For instance, the practice of kneeling in confession. But we learned it worked both ways. We learned also to take it easy on ourselves. We won't always get it right. We just keep practicing with God's help, as we say in our baptismal vows. Practicing God came home to me again when I was ordained and began wearing a collar. I remember feeling awed and the creeping realization that this meant people would think I am actually holier than they are, when in fact I am not. The fact that so many people have been harmed by people in collars because they had trusted that that person was practicing God and utterly failed them. That weighed on me. It felt like an awesome responsibility. Better to look at my collar, I think, as like a student driver bumper sticker. A public statement to people that I'm a mere student in what St. Benedict called the school for the service of the Lord. And I guess I could call 4 years in seminary a good school for the service of the Lord in one sense. I mean, I loved reading and reflecting, going to lectures. I loved writing papers. Actually, I did. I loved practicum experiences like serving as a chaplain or doing field education in a parish like this one. It was challenging, but it was a controlled environment. I was in a program that had been predetermined and structured by others. As well as I had been prepared, I didn't really go to school until I began to live out my vocation. And I learned that the school for the service of the Lord is not, in fact, in an actual school or a cloister, but in the real world, amongst real people with real pain and real joy and real sorrows and beautiful and messy lives. Our world is every bit as wild and woolly as stories the Bible tells. We have the great kings and the terrible ones. We have the underdog heroes and the falls of the mighty from grace. We have soaring achievements along with epic failures, existential threats like floods and fires and wars and enslavement, rank idolaters, and people of transcendent faith. But when it comes down to it, it's not really the sweeping saga that we are living. The fate of the people of God depends on how we practice God at the street level, in families, in the institutions we are a part of, in our neighborhoods, in our civic engagement. It's in how we understand both the extent and the limits of what we are responsible for and to whom we are responsible. It all comes down to how we are with each other, how we help make communities healthy, and how we hold our community together through its hills and valleys. And that's where we meet Jesus today, in community. Matthew is writing here about Jesus relatively late in his earthly ministry. One can imagine by now that there is a large community of Jesus followers, and Jesus has been asking more of his disciples as they try to receive these new followers. Perhaps his words were precipitated by Peter or another of the apostles asking him, "Hey, can you help us? We're having a hard time holding the community together. We have a problem person or two. What should we do? How do we practice God?" And Jesus answers, three-step plan. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. I just realized this is a 4-step plan. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, it's a 5-step plan. Refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Now, it's always bothered me that the words we hear from Jesus today have been so consistently understood as how to help leaders root out bad actors. I'm quite certain that in thousands of years of Christian history, these words have been cited in situations that harmed people. And I want to say also that the verses directly prior to the ones we hear today are about the shepherd who will leave his 99 sheep to find the lost one. In the verses after today's reading, we hear about the extravagant generosity with which we should forgive, not 7 times 7, but 70 times 7. So we are talking about lost sheep, and the context is more about regaining the lost than kicking them out. Jesus is offering a humble approach. Perhaps, after all, in our conversation with a lost sheep, we will listen. We might even learn that we need to ask for forgiveness. Perhaps we will realize trespasses of our own are at play, not just the trespasses against us. The ultimate point is not correction, it is reconciliation. We should leave the judging to God. Now, it's also true that while we cannot always be responsible for what another member does, we do have responsibility to our community. And there are times when a member of the community is lost or harmed, and there are times that the community is being harmed. And this leads to another way of practicing God in community life, which our gospel implies may not be happening, and that is talking about stuff. Silence and secrets work against healthy communities, and yet they are a great temptation. Many of us don't like conflict. Many of us think that we are at church to be kind and nice, and so we should never raise a difficult issue, lest we are not kind or not appear nice. We also hate it when people leave us. We confuse compassion, I think, with empathy and make excuses for the person. Or we minimize a problem or kick it down the road. Perhaps we feel loyal to a person. Perhaps we depend on them. Perhaps we just think we'll make it worse. In any case, we are so often silent. A few weeks ago, a woman named Julia Ayala Harris decided to use her voice. Harris is the newly elected president of the House of Deputies of the Episcopal Church. She is the most powerful layperson in the church. She's like the senior warden of the whole church. She posted an open letter about her experience of a bishop making unwanted physical contact with her at General Convention last year. She did not name the bishop. Her letter was about her inability and frustration to find ways to address her concern, and it called the church to look harder at the rigor with which a church run by bishops ensures that bishops are held to account. Now, some will say about her, "You really make the church look bad," or "It doesn't sound like he did anything that bad," or "Get over it." But I believe Julia Ayala Harris, who is the most, well, I said, is this powerful layperson, is the sentinel that Ezekiel is talking about, warning her community to live into God's will on earth as it is in heaven, or to experience a decline in authority and leadership. I'm very glad that she now leads her church, our church. In all that we do to right wrongs and repair the breach, Eugene Peterson, writing about Jesus' words, says that our core principle is unity based on God's love, not exclusion based on someone else's sin. That being said, in some circumstances, exclusion, excommunication, is required for the sake of the unity. Some years ago, when I was senior warden at another parish, the rector and I arrived at stage 5 in Jesus' plan, and we asked a member to leave our congregation. He had refused to repent and atone for repeated racist and ethnic slurs he made to a beautiful family who had recently joined our church. It was hard to do, but easy to decide. Trying to protect one lost sheep was causing harm to the other 99, especially to the people who were being verbally abused. In fact, sadly, the family did not stay with us. I felt we had failed them. Did we act quickly enough? Why did we do all 5 steps? Did we place too much faith in the one's ability to change? Now, the family did not blame us, but in truth, it was their pain that had been our teacher, and that is not fair to them. They were so kind, but our church became associated for them with their pain. And there are other churches. God forgive us and God be with them. I hope I learned how to be a better neighbor. And I know I was hard on myself. I think we're like that when we torture ourselves. Should I have done something? Oh no, I had this gut feeling. I should have been paying attention. I was hoping someone else would do it. I think, however, Mr. and Mrs. Pettis would remind me that I am practicing God. And to know that Jesus is saying clearly that I am not God. I can only do so much. And you know, we can't fix people. We can only speak our truth. In fact, perhaps trying to fix people is the evil twin of remaining silent. Another thing to practice, giving it over to God. In Paul's letter to the Romans, he writes about not owing anyone anything. I think perhaps he is alluding to our sins of omission, what is not said, what is left undone. What do we owe? Perhaps an apology, an open loop closed, a book returned, a generous impulse given into, feedback, an answer, a thank you, a boundary set. And we owe the truth spoken in love. The why of all the commandments, Paul says, is loving our neighbors as ourselves. When we hold these things back from each other, our communities are depleted. And so are we, for we are holding back the things we want for ourselves. So go now and be a sentinel. Go and practice God. And don't forget, sometimes practicing God means practicing loving ourselves.